Somebody, roughly 750,000 years ago, ate a fish. That's it. That's the whole scene. A creature you would not quite call human, sitting near the edge of a lake in what is now northern Israel, eating a fish that had been cooked. Not raw. Not scavenged. Cooked. On purpose. At the right temperature. And we know this because of the fish's teeth. Now here's the strange thing. You probably assume nobody could ever know what the first cooked meal was. It was too long ago. There were no recipes, no witnesses, no leftovers. The whole idea sounds impossible, like asking what the first joke was, or the first song. But we're closer to an answer than you'd think. We have a real candidate, a specific meal, a specific place, a specific fish, and the way scientists cracked it is honestly wilder than the meal itself. So here's what I want to do. I want to walk you back to the single oldest dinner we can actually point to and say, that one. That's the first meal we can prove humans cooked. And then I want to show you why even that answer hides a much stranger question underneath it. Because the real mystery isn't what we cooked first. It's why an animal ever looked at a perfectly good piece of food and thought, you know what this needs? Fire. Let's start with the fish. The place is called Gesher Benot Ya'aqov. It's an ancient lakeside site, and roughly 780,000 years ago, someone was living there. We don't have their bones, so we can't be certain who they were. But based on the age and the stone tools they left behind, our best guess is that they were Homo erectus, an ancestor. Not us, but on the way to us. And scattered around the spots where their fires once burned, archaeologists found something odd. Fish teeth. Piles of them. But almost no fish bones. Sit with that for a second, because it's the whole clue. Teeth everywhere, bones almost nowhere. If you were just tossing whole raw fish into a fire and eating the burnt bits, you'd expect the opposite, charred bones all over the place. So where did the bones go? Here's the leading answer. When you cook a fish gently, at a low, controlled heat, rather than blasting it in open flame, the bones soften and eventually crumble away to nothing over time. But the teeth, the hardest material in the body, survive, so a pile of teeth with the bones missing isn't a sign of sloppy eating. It's a fingerprint of careful cooking. And the fish weren't random either. Most belong to two large species from the lake, fish known for being nutritious and frankly for tasting good. Somebody had preferences. Somebody had favorites. That's the part that gets me. This wasn't survival gruel choked down in desperation. Somebody, 780,000 years ago, was eating the good fish. But a pile of teeth is circumstantial. To actually prove those fish were cooked and not just burned, scientists needed to do something that sounds impossible. They needed to take the temperature of a fire that went out 750,000 years ago. Here's how they pulled it off, and it's genuinely one of the cleverest tricks in archaeology. Tooth enamel is made of tiny crystals, and when enamel gets heated, those crystals change size in a predictable way. The hotter it gets, the bigger they grow. The change is permanent. It's locked in. The tooth basically records the highest temperature it ever felt, and it holds on to that memory for hundreds of thousands of years. So the researchers borrowed a technique from forensic science, the kind used to investigate human remains, and they used it to read the crystals inside those ancient fish teeth. Then they ran experiments, cooking and burning fish at every temperature from a gentle warmth all the way up to a raging 900 degrees, building a chart of exactly what each temperature does to the crystals. Then they compared. And the ancient teeth came back with a clear signature. Heated, but not scorched. Somewhere in the range you'd get from real cooking, hot enough to transform the fish, but nowhere near the temperature of being dropped straight into open flame. Read that again, because it's the key to the entire case. The fish weren't burned, they were cooked. Which means the fire wasn't just present. The fire was being controlled. That's the difference between an animal that stumbles across a wildfire and an animal that runs the fire. One is an accident. The other is a technology. And based on the missing bones and the low, even heat, the best guess is that these fish may have been cooked whole. possibly sealed inside a kind of earthen oven, buried in warm earth, slow roasted, which means the oldest meal we can prove might not have been a quick grill at all. It might have been something closer to a slow-cooked pot roast, 780,000 years ago. So there it is, our answer. The first meal humans ever cooked, fish, done low and slow, by the edge of a lake, by a hand that wasn't quite ours. Except, I've been lying to you a little, because the first meal we can prove and the first meal that ever happened are not the same thing at all, and the gap between them is enormous. Here's the problem with calling that fish the first. It's not the first cooked meal. It's the oldest one we can currently point to and prove. And in science, those are wildly different claims. Because there's other evidence, messier, more argued over, that fire and food were meeting up long before that fish. At some cave sites in Africa, there are burnt bones and traces of ash that some researchers date back 1 million years, maybe more. Push into the really contested claims, and you find people arguing for fire being used up to 1.5, even close to 2 million years ago. So why don't we just crown one of those the winner? Because of a brutal little problem that haunts this entire field. Burnt does not mean cooked. Think about it. A bone can end up charred a dozen ways that have nothing to do with dinner. A wildfire sweeps through. A carcass gets tossed near a fire and forgotten. Ash blows in from somewhere else. Finding a burnt bone next to old ashes tells you fire and food were in the same room. But it doesn't tell you anybody meant to put them together. That's what made the fish so special. The clever part wasn't finding heat. It was proving intent, proving the heat was gentle and controlled, the temperature of a cook, and not the temperature of a catastrophe. And this is where the whole story flips on you. Because if you think the big question is which specific meal came first, you're chasing the wrong thing entirely. That fish isn't the beginning of the story. That fish is the moment we finally caught our ancestors in the act of something they'd probably been doing, clumsily, occasionally, imperfectly, for a very, very long time already. The first cooked meal wasn't a meal. It was a habit forming in the dark, over hundreds of thousands of years, that we're only now barely able to see the edges of. So the honest answer to what was the first meal humans cooked is this: we don't know, and we may never know, because the first one left no teeth to read. What we have is the oldest surviving snapshot of a process that was already old when the snapshot was taken. And once you see it that way, a much bigger question opens up. Not what did we cook first, but why did we start at all? Think about how genuinely bizarre cooking is as a behavior. Every other animal on Earth eats its food the way it finds it, raw, immediate. A lion doesn't marinate. A bear doesn't roast. For nearly the entire history of life, food and the thing you swallow were the same object, no steps in between. And then one animal inserts a step. A dangerous, slow, complicated step involving the single most terrifying force in nature. An animal decides to take its dinner and hold it inside fire, the thing every other creature runs from, and wait. That's insane. On the face of it, that is a terrible idea. So why would it ever catch on? Because cooking is basically pre-digestion. It's doing some of your gut's work outside your body before you ever take a bite. Heat breaks down tough fibers and tangled proteins. It kills parasites. It turns hard, stubborn food soft and safe and easy. A cooked meal gives you far more usable energy for far less effort than a raw one. You spend less chewing, less digesting, and you get more back. And there's a famous idea, most associated with a scientist named Richard Wrangham, that this wasn't just a nice bonus. It might have remade us. Here's the logic. Digesting raw food is expensive. It takes a big gut and a lot of energy just to break the stuff down. But cooking outsources that work to the fire. And if your body suddenly doesn't need to spend as much energy running an enormous digestive system, that freed up energy can go somewhere else. Somewhere like a brain. A big, hungry, expensive, glorious brain the exact kind of brain that could one day figure out how to read the temperature of a 780,000-year-old fish. Now, and I have to be honest here, because the science demands it, this idea is debated hotly. The timing doesn't line up perfectly for everyone. Some researchers think our brains and bodies started changing before there's solid proof of regular cooking. The honest answer is, we don't fully know which came first, the fire or the change. It's one of the great open arguments about what made us us. But even the possibility is staggering. It suggests that the answer to what was the first meal humans ever cooked might be tangled up with a much wilder answer, to the question of what made us human in the first place.